Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are tackling an incredibly complex and just a deeply tragic subject, the Gilgo Beach serial killings, which you may also know as the Long Island serial killings.
It's a story that spans decades. It involves multiple police jurisdictions, so many agonizing setbacks for the families, and then finally a really dramatic breakthrough using modern forensics.
We're talking about an investigation that really stretches from the early 1990s all the way through 2011. And honestly, it stands as one of the most frustrating cold cases in recent American history.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to give you a clear, factual, and just a respectful look at the entire timeline. We really need to cut through the years of speculation and, conflicting theories to focus on the hard evidence that's been brought forward.
The scope is just immense. We are tracing a series of events that are mostly concentrated along Ocean Parkway in Suffolk and Nassau counties, right there in New York. And it starts as far back as 1993.
That's right. What began as a search for just one missing person, a young woman named Shannon Gilbert, ultimately uncovered the remains of 10, maybe even 11 or more individuals.
And those initial discoveries, the ones in late 2010 and early 2011, they revealed a horrifying scale to this tragedy.
And now, of course, the case has entered this profound new phase. We've seen the arrest and the subsequent indictment of Rex Heuermann, who is a resident of Massapequa Park and, by trade, a Manhattan architect.
Right. And between July 2023 and the end of 2024, Heuermann was charged in connection with 7 of these murders. So for our deep dive today, we want to structure this to follow the facts. We'll start with the event that really forced law enforcement to confront this hidden horror, the disappearance of Shannon Gilbert.
To really understand the gravity of this case, you have to start there. We have to focus on the victims and the difficult path of the investigation, beginning with the person who unwittingly, opened this terrible chapter.
So let's start there. Shannon Gilbert was just 24 years old. She vanished in the early hours of May 1st, 2010. She was working as an escort in Oak Beach, Long Island, which is a very secluded, gated community.
And the sources that detail her final moments, they paint this just harrowing picture, and it's captured almost entirely through one piece of evidence.
That disparate 911 call.
Exactly. The call came in at 4:51 a.m. Shannon was panicked. She was frantic. She was telling the dispatcher that someone was, quote, after her.
And trying to kill her.
Trying to kill her. She was calling from inside the residence of her client, a man named Joseph Brewer, but she didn't stay there. The police records show she just fled that house in a terrified state.
She just ran, and the sources detail her flight path. She tried to get into another nearby home.
Gus Coletti, a resident, he let her inside for a moment, but when he tried to get her to stay put so he could call the police, she just bolted again.
And she was last seen by another neighbor, Peter Hackett, banging on his door, screaming for help, and then she just disappeared into the night, into that vast, unforgiving marshland that borders Ocean Parkway.
The search for her started right away, but it was really hampered by that dense terrain. It took 19 months.
19 months.
All the way until December 2011 for searchers to finally find her remains. She was found in a thick tidal marsh, about half a mile from where she was last seen.
And this right here, this is the first major point of controversy in the entire case. So crucial to understand because it's what created such distrust between the family, the public, and the police.
Her official cause of death. It has been intensely contested from the start.
So what was the official ruling?
Well, it's complicated. In May 2012, the Suffolk County medical examiners ruled her death was likely an accidental drowning. They said she probably succumbed to the elements in the marsh.
But the final document listed the cause of death as undetermined.
And that ambiguity immediately fueled skepticism. It just didn't sit right with her family.
And that skepticism, it was reinforced by the findings of an independent autopsy. Shannon's mother, Murray Gilbert, who fought so tirelessly, she arranged for a private examination.
That was with the forensic pathologist Michael Baden in September 2014.
And what did Baden find that challenged the police narrative of an accident?
Baden's findings were deeply unsettling. He found damage to Shannon Gilbert's hyoid bone.
Which is a small U-shaped bone in the neck.
Exactly. And it's often fractured or damaged in cases of manual strangulation. Now, this injury doesn't definitively prove strangulation, but it certainly raises a substantial red flag. It makes that accidental drowning ruling highly questionable.
On top of that, Baden also noted the position of her body. She was found face up in the marsh.
Which is not the common position for a drowning victim. They usually end up face down.
So all these details led Shannon's mother, Mari, who became this fierce advocate for all the victims, to firmly believe that her daughter was murdered by a serial killer. She was very critical of the police for their refusal, initially, to treat it as a homicide.
And the struggle for transparency was so long and difficult. The police initially withheld that crucial 9/11 recording.
For years.
For years. It took a New York State Supreme Court order in May 2020 to even mandate its release. And the tape finally came out in May 2022.
The fact that investigators kept that critical piece of audio, Shanann's last moments, hidden for so many years, really speaks volumes about the early hurdles in the investigation.
It does, and maybe even some internal disagreements about where the case was going.
So while the police were internally debating what happened to Shanann, the search for her led to this shocking discovery that just shifted the entire landscape of the investigation. This brings us to December 2010, and the discovery of the group that became known as the Gilgo 4.
The search method changed everything. Investigators started using specific FBI crime data, which suggested that body disposal sites often cluster near accessible roadways, even if they're hidden by dense vegetation.
And that shift in strategy was absolutely key. An officer named John Malia and his cadaver dog, Blue, had searched for months in 2010 with no success. They came back in December to the shoulder of Ocean Parkway near Gilgo Beach.
And the dog, Blue, he alerted on a scent, pushed through the thick, winter-covered scrub brush.
And that led to the first remains, a skeleton wrapped in deteriorating burlap.
This was later identified as Melissa Barthelemy, and once that initial discovery was made, investigators just saturated the area. They quickly found 3 more sets of human remains, all clustered remarkably close together.
All within about 500 feet of each other.
It's an incredibly small area.
This concentrated burial site revealed the pattern of the killer, or at least the killer's pattern, during that specific time frame. These 4 women, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amberlynn Costello, became known as the Gilgo 4. We really need to honor each of their stories here.
Let's start with Maureen Brainerd Barnes. She was 25. She disappeared first, way back in July 2007. She was a mother of 2 from Norwich, Connecticut. And the tragic context here is that she traveled to New York City and returned to sex work, advertising on Craigslist, in a desperate attempt to earn enough money to save her house. She had received an eviction notice.
She was last seen on July 9th, 2007, planning to meet a client near her motel in Manhattan.
And when her remains were found, there was a grim detail about her body. She was found restrained, secured with 3 leather belts. That level of preparation is just a chilling indicator of the killer's methods.
So next was Melissa Barthelemy. She was 24, went missing in July of 2009. She's living in the Bronx.
And her disappearance wasn't just silent. It was followed by this prolonged, sinister act of psychological cruelty that targeted her family.
The details of those phone calls are absolutely chilling. They really underscore the specific sadism involved in this case.
For 5 weeks after Melissa's disappearance, her 15-year-old sister received a series of phone calls. They're described as vulgar, mocking, insulting.
And the caller, who police believe was the killer, was using Melissa's own cell phone.
Yes. He tormented her younger sister. He asked if she was a whore like her sister, and then eventually he just callously stated that Melissa was dead and that he was going to watch her rot.
Police tried to trace those calls. They pinged from several locations in Manhattan near Madison Square Garden and Midtown, and then later traced to Massapequa on Long Island.
That geographical spread of the calls provided some of the earliest clues about the perpetrator's movements. It linked the case to both the city and Long Island's South Shore.
And we should also note some activity on her phone was traced near Manorville around the time she vanished, which is the location that's going to become very important later.
The third victim discovered was Megan Waterman, 22 years old, a young mother from Scarborough, Maine. She went missing in June 2010.
She was staying at a motel in Hauppauge, which is about 15 miles northeast of Gilgo Beach.
And Megan was a mother to a 3-year-old daughter. The alarm bells for her family went off immediately because it was completely out of character for her not to check in with her child. They reported her missing within 2 days.
And sources indicate she was a victim of sex trafficking, though the person arrested on those charges was later ruled out as having any connection to her murder.
Finally, we have Amberlynn Costello. She was 27, lived in West Babylon, quite close to the eventual disposal site. She vanished in September 2010 after arranging to meet a client who had offered her a significant sum of money, about $2,500.
And Amber's disappearance, this provided the critical, single most important non-forensic lead in the entire investigation, though nobody really understood its significance for a decade.
Her roommate, who was the last person to see her alive, gave police this highly detailed description of the client.
It wasn't just his physical appearance, but crucially, the vehicle he was driving.
A dark green, first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche.
And that vehicle detail was filed away. And it would ultimately be the thread that, years later, led law enforcement directly to the prime suspect.
The discovery of these four women so close together, it immediately suggested a single, terrifying predator was operating on Long Island.
But then, as police expanded their searches in the spring of 2011, they uncovered 6 more sets of remains, and the scope of the case just expanded exponentially.
And this expansion was frightening because it didn't just add more victims. It dramatically stretched the timeline and revealed a far more complex pattern of disposal.
It involved dismemberment, dispersal across significant distances, methods often used to, complicate identification and obscure the cause of death.
Right, and it's here we have to discuss the Manorville victims. Their cases show this chilling geographic puzzle that investigators were facing. Pieces of the same person scattered across Long Island, sometimes separated by over a decade.
Let's start with Valerie Mack. Initially, she was just Jane Doe number 6. She was 24, working as an escort in Philadelphia, and went missing back in 2000.
And she was never officially reported missing by her family, which complicated things right from the start.
Her case just embodies this complexity. In November of 2000, her torso was found wrapped in garbage bags, dumped in the woods near Manorville.
Which is in central Suffolk County, about 60 miles east of the Gilgo Beach area.
For 11 years, that torso remained unidentified. Then, during those massive 2011 searches near Gilgo, investigators found 3 more body parts.
Her head, her right foot, and her hands.
Which means the killer had driven 60 miles east to dump the torso, and then, maybe years later, driven west toward Ocean Parkway to deposit the remaining pieces.
It wasn't until 2020, through the use of genetic genealogy, that officials confirmed that these scattered remains, the torso from 2000 and the parts from 2011, all belonged to the same person, Valerie Mack.
That was an astonishing forensic linkage. It proved the killer was operating across the entire width of the island.
And we see a chillingly similar operational style with Jessica Taylor. She was 20, working in Manhattan when she went missing in 2003. Her dismembered torso was discovered just 5 days later in Manorville, specifically on a pile of scrap wood.
And there was this deliberate act of depersonalization in her case. A specific tattoo on her body had been mutilated with a sharp instrument, an apparent effort to destroy an identifying mark.
And just like with Valerie Mack, the rest of her remains, her skull, hands, and forearm, were found along Ocean Parkway during those 2011 searches.
The parallel disposal pattern torso in Manorville, extremities near Gilgo, it strongly implied the same perpetrator was responsible.
And we now know that Rex Heuermann has been indicted for both their murders. Those charges came through in June and December of 2024. This confirms that investigative hypothesis that these geographically separate crimes were, in fact, linked.
But the true scope of this goes back even further than the Manorville victims. The earliest case that's been linked by DNA evidence pushes the timeline all the way back to 1993.
The murder of Sandra Costilla.
Right. She was 28 years old when she was killed in November 1993. Her body was found at a wooded area in North Sea, Long Island.
A location that's about 60 miles northeast of Gilgo Beach and, crucially, far away from those other Ocean Parkway disposal sites. It just shows the killer was operating across a massive radius spanning decades.
The charge against Heuermann for Costilla's murder came in June of 2024, nearly 3 decades after her death.
And the evidence.
DNA. From hairs found on her body that matched Heuermann's profile. That linkage is just profound. It expands the scope of the case by almost 14 years from the first of the Gilgo 4 victims.
We also have to address the deeply sad case of the mother and child, a narrative woven together from fragmented remains discovered years apart.
This involves Tanya Jackson, who was nicknamed Peaches, and her daughter, Tatiana Dykes, who was known for years as Baby Doe.
Tanya Jackson was a U.S. Army veteran who served in the mid-90s. Her dismembered torso was found in June of 1997.
It was inside a green plastic Rubbermaid container in Hempstead Lake State Park, about 10 miles west of Jones Beach.
And the torso had this very distinctive peach tattoo, which is how she got the nickname.
Her daughter's skeletal remains were found 14 years later in April 2011 during the Gilgo searches. They were found near the partial remains of Valerie Mack.
Tatiana Dykes, believed to be about 2 years old, was wrapped in a blanket wearing gold jewelry.
The separation of mother and child and the distance between where their remains were found, it just highlights the killer's calculated and cold disposal methods.
It took years of intense DNA analysis. By 2016, DNA confirmed the torso found in 1997 and other remains belonged to the same person. Further testing confirmed Peaches was the mother of baby Doe.
And their identities were publicly announced in April 2025 as Tanya Denise Jackson and Tatiana Marie Dykes. This linkage just underscores how modern genealogy is often the only way to solve these fragmented cold cases.
And then there are two more victims who highlight the challenging forensic effort: Karen Vergata and the individual known only as Asian Doe.
Karen Vergata. She was referred to for years as Fire Island Jane Doe, or Jane Doe number 7. She was 34 when she went missing around February 1996 in Manhattan.
Her remains were just scattered by water and time. Her severed legs were found in a garbage bag on Fire Island in 1996.
And then 15 years later, her skull and teeth were recovered across the Great South Bay at Gilgo Beach in Nassau County during those massive 2011 searches.
The hypothesis is that her legs were carried by the currents to Fire Island after the body was dumped, which reflects just how dynamic the environment of these disposal sites was.
And just like Valerie Mack, it was genetic genealogy that finally gave her name back in 2023, 27 years after she disappeared.
This technology wasn't just identifying the killer, it was doing the essential, painstaking work of identifying the victims first.
Finally, we have Asian Doe. This individual's remains were found in April 2011 near the Gilgo 4.
Forensics determined this victim was biologically male but was found wearing women's clothing, which led investigators to consider they may have been a transgender woman or a crossdresser.
The forensic details are very specific. They suffered blunt force trauma, were missing 4 teeth, and were likely of Han Chinese ethnicity, between 17 and 23 years old.
This victim had been deceased for 5 to 10 years when discovered. The difficulty in identification led authorities to release updated composite renderings in September 2024, showing both a male and a female-presenting version, hoping to generate new leads.
The sheer number of victims, this vast geographic spread, from Manorville to North Sea to Fire Island, and the long timeline, coupled with that initial refusal by some key figures to involve federal resources, it all meant this investigation was just paralyzed for years.
The obstacles were tremendous. When you look back, the single largest roadblock seems to have been the political and personal friction within law enforcement.
And the most damning example of that involves the former Suffolk County Police Chief James Burke.
Burke's alleged actions severely hampered the early stages of the investigation. He was widely reported to have actively blocked the FBI from officially joining the Gilgo Beach case for years.
This intentional obstruction meant the investigation was deprived of the FBI's immense forensic and analytical resources during those critical initial months and years.
Just think about the impact of that. Critical evidence may have degraded or been mishandled, and inter-county coordination was certainly compromised.
It wasn't until December 2015, the day after Burke was indicted in a completely unrelated matter, that the FBI was finally allowed full access to the case files and the crime scenes.
Before the FBI joined, police had developed an early profile back in 2011. It suggested the killer was likely a white male, mid-20s to mid-40s, familiar with the South Shore of Long Island, and had access to the specific burlap sacks used to wrap some of the remains.
And that profile proved remarkably accurate in retrospect, but it wasn't enough to secure an arrest for many, many years.
The public release of a key piece of evidence in 2020 injected some new life into the stalled investigation.
That was the leather belt found near Ocean Parkway.
Yes, the belt with the embossed letters H, M, or WH, depending on how you looked at it. Police publicly stated they believed this belt was handled by the perpetrator and did not belong to any of the victims.
The hope was this distinctive item would trigger a memory or a lead from the public.
And while the belt was an important investigative tool, the true, unexpected breakthrough that led investigators directly to Rex Heuermann wasn't the belt. It wasn't new DNA initially.
It was that crucial yet overlooked piece of witness testimony from all the way back in 2010.
That witness was Amber Costello's roommate, who provided the description of the client and his vehicle shortly after she disappeared.
The dark green first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche.
Exactly. Police started re-examining that Avalanche description in 2022. They began cross-referencing this specific, relatively unusual vehicle with records across the South Shore.
And that search led them directly to Rex Heuermann. He was 59 at the time of his arrest in July 2023. He lived in Massapequa Park, which placed him exactly in the geographical heart of the police's focus area on the South Shore.
And he was a professional architect who worked in Midtown Manhattan, which aligned him with the call locations that were linked to Melissa Barthelomew's phone.
Once that vehicle linked to Heuermann, the comprehensive forensic and digital investigation began, and it created this undeniable chain of evidence.
Let's talk about those forensic links, starting with the DNA, which is arguably the most crucial scientific element.
Right, so investigators managed to obtain a mitochondrial DNA sample from Hoyerman, but it was from a pretty unconventional source.
That source was a discarded pizza crust. Investigators successfully got a sample of his DNA from a pizza crust he threw into a public trash can. This DNA was then analyzed for a mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA, profile.
Okay, so why focus on mtDNA here rather than the standard nuclear DNA?
That's a great question, and it's a key technical point for understanding modern cold cases. Nuclear DNA is unique to every individual. It provides a definitive match, but it degrades really rapidly.
Especially in environmental conditions like these.
Exactly. But mitochondrial DNA is much more robust. It survives decay far longer, which makes it the hero in older fragmented cases like Gilgo Beach. The downside is that it's inherited from the mother, so it can only narrow the suspect pool to a maternal line, not a single person.
But in this case, the mtDNA from the pizza crust did match the mtDNA profile extracted from a hair found on the burlap wrapping of one of the victims.
And that match was enough to narrow the focus entirely onto Hoyerman. But then the digital evidence provided the timeline and the corroboration.
Before we get to that, there was a second, equally compelling DNA link found at the scene that tied back directly to the Hoyerman household.
Yes. This involved hair samples found on or near 3 of the victims. Investigators took trash samples from the Hoyerman residence and got DNA from his wife. The samples matched hair found at the crime scenes. Now, the fact that the wife's DNA was found on the victims initially sounds confusing, but investigators were very clear about the context.
They explicitly stated in court documents that cell phone and financial records placed Hoyerman's wife and children out of state during the times the killings are believed to have happened.
This suggests that the husband, acting alone, may have transferred the hair from his home onto the victims, either through his clothing or his vehicle when his family was away.
And there was more. DNA found on one of the leather belts used to restrain Maureen Brainerd Barnes was also determined to match the DNA of Hoyerman's wife.
Which, again, points strongly toward the transfer of household DNA by the perpetrator.
So beyond the physical evidence, the digital footprint created this airtight timeline of obsession and presence.
Investigators successfully used cell phone records to link Hoyerman's movements directly to 3 of the 4 Gilgo 4 victims at critical times.
And this digital evidence didn't stop at physical location. An email account strongly linked to Hoyerman was found to be conducting extensive online searches.
And the court records detailing these searches, they paint a truly disturbing picture of the man's private life and his morbid fascination with his own crimes.
The searches included frequent monitoring of the investigation's progress, searching for news articles about the Gilgo victims, but they also extended into the extremely dark and depraved, including searches for sadistic materials, child pornography, and most chillingly, direct searches for images of the victims and their relatives.
That digital trail provides not only the proof of presence near the crime scenes, but also the motive of a sustained morbid obsession. It suggests a long-term pattern of psychopathy and calculation.
So the combination of the vehicle, the DNA, and this digital history created a comprehensive case that led to his initial indictment for the Gilgo 4.
Since then, the charges have expanded. He was initially charged with the murders of 3 of the Gilgo 4, then later charged with the 4th, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, in January 2024.
Then came the charges for Sandra Castilla, Jessica Taylor, and Valerie Mack throughout 2024, bringing the total number of charged murders to 7.
The comprehensiveness of the evidence now linking him to victims across a 2-decade span and multiple disposal sites really solidifies the police theory of a single, highly active serial killer.
However, as we review the totality of the Gilgo Beach case, we have to acknowledge a critical complexity factor, the existence of other potential actors in the same area, which leads us to briefly mention John Bittrolff.
John Bittrolff is a Suffolk County resident, a carpenter, who was convicted in 2017 for the murders of 2 other sex workers, Rita Tangradi and Colleen McNamee, whose bodies were found back in 1993 and 1994.
And his profile and geography show this really unsettling overlap. In 2017, a Suffolk County prosecutor openly suggested that Bittrolff might be responsible for some of the Gilgo Beach murders because of similarities in the crime scenes.
The geographical connection is striking. Bittrolff lived in Manorville,
which is exactly where the dismembered torsos of Gilgo victims Jessica Taylor and Valerie Mack were recovered years earlier.
He was operating in the exact geographic region where those victims were first dumped.
And on top of that, the source material notes an incredibly unsettling social connection. The adult daughter of Bitrul's victim, Rita Tangradi, happened to be the best friend of Gilgo victim, Melissa Barthelemy.
It's a shocking coincidence, and while the Suffolk County Police have been understandably tight-lipped on any potential link, given the active investigation into Hoyerman, the overlap does raise a significant analytical question.
Was it one killer who changed his method and geography over time, or were there multiple killers operating in the same area during the same period?
The current evidence focuses almost entirely on Hoyerman, but the possibility of additional perpetrators can't be fully dismissed in an investigation that spans this much time and distance.
This brings us to our final analysis. When you synthesize the full chronology, from Sandra Casfiglia in 1993 to the cluster found in 2010, it reveals the core challenges and the remarkable triumphs of this investigation.
The synthesis shows two clear behavioral patterns that needed to be reconciled. First, you have the consistent victim demographic, mostly petite women, many of whom were sex workers struggling with difficult circumstances. But second, you have this vast disparity in disposal methods and locations, especially when you compare the early dismembered victims with the Gilgo Four.
The early cases, like Costilla in North Sea and the body parts of Regatta scattered across Fire Island and Bay Beach, show a killer who was willing to travel extensively to scatter remains.
And the Mandeville victims, Mack and Taylor, were dismembered and their parts were dumped in distant woods before other pieces resurfaced near Gilgo years later. That suggests a sophisticated, geographically expansive plan in the 90s and early 2000s.
And you contrast that with the Gilgo Four Brainerd Barnes, Barthelemy, Waterman, and Costello. Their bodies were found intact and tightly clustered in one specific limited section of the parkway in 2010.
It's a marked change in disposal behavior, and it's fascinating. Was this due to increased confidence, maybe arrogance, or was it increased risk-taking leading to less careful disposal? We don't know.
Looking back at the decades it took to reach Hoyerman's arrest, we have to emphasize the immense scientific and investigative journey. It was a failure of immediate policing coupled with a triumph of patience and technology.
The ability to identify victims like Valerie Mack and Karen Vergata decades after their deaths hinged entirely on the advent of forensic genetic genealogy. This technology allowed fragmented, unidentified remains to be matched through distant family trees, finally returning names to these women.
And critically, it provided the method, through that mtDNA match, to link the discarded pizza crust to the crime scene evidence.
So this deep dive into the source material shows that the pursuit of justice here was a long game. It demanded overcoming major institutional obstacles like James Burke's obstruction, and it relied on the patient preservation of fragmented evidence until the scientific tools were finally capable of catching up.
The most critical information often lay dormant, just waiting for that unique combination of an old witness description and cutting-edge DNA analysis.
The sheer scope of this case, spanning 2 decades, 3 major counties, and involving every type of forensic evidence you can imagine, from digital geofencing to mitochondrial DNA, it illustrates the immense complexity involved when law enforcement tries to reconcile modern technology with cold, fragmented evidence from the past.
And this case is far from closed. There are ongoing investigations into other potential victims and, of course, the upcoming legal proceedings for Hoyerman.
And so you are ultimately left with the chilling question of whether the pursuit of justice, often delayed by years or even decades, will ever fully clarify the fate of every life lost along this grim stretch of Long Island. The truth about every victim involved in this massive, multi-county investigation is still unfolding, and that quest for answers, though it's advanced, it continues.
Thank you for joining us for this intense deep dive into the sources.